The desert was quiet that evening, though the wind whispered over the dry earth as if carrying secrets older than memory itself. A lone rider moved across the fading horizon. His shadow stretched long against the golden light of the setting sun. He carried no words with him, only silence, and the silence was heavier than any weapon slung across his back. His chest bore the marks of battle, his eyes the weight of promises he could not keep. To the people of his tribe, he was a protector, an Apache warrior who stood unyielding against every storm. To her, he was more than that. He was the man whose presence stirred her heart, even as his voice spoke words that cut sharper than steel. "I can't love you." Those words hung between them like smoke rising from a dying fire. He had said them without looking at her, his jaw set, his face unreadable beneath the dark strands of his hair. She remembered the sound of his voice that day, low and steady, carrying the finality of a decision he could not bring himself to explain. And she, trembling, had tried to answer, but found no words that would not betray the ache she carried inside. For nights afterward, she replayed the moment, wondering if he had meant it, or if the truth was buried beneath his duty, his silence, and the unspoken laws of a world older than hers. She was not born to the desert. The rhythms of her life had once been different soft hills, quiet rivers, the sound of bells ringing in a distant town. She had come west searching for something she could not name, and what she found was him. She found him among the red cliffs, the scent of cedar, and the call of eagles that wheeled high above. He never sought her out, yet somehow their paths always crossed. Sometimes it was by the river where she washed her clothes in the cool current while he watered his horse. Other times it was at the edge of the village fires, when the night was lit with drums and laughter, and yet his eyes always seemed fixed on the shadows beyond. Their words had been few at first, but the silences between them carried a kind of closeness she had never known. It was not a love that had bloomed like in stories. No, theirs was a love born of quiet glances, of accidental touches that lingered too long, of shared gazes at the horizon where dreams seemed to vanish. She had felt it in the way his hand brushed hers when he passed her a cup of water, the way his voice softened when speaking to her alone. But he had never spoken it, never allowed the feeling to be named. And when at last she gathered courage to ask what she meant to him, his answer had been the blade. "I can't love you." She tried to believe him. She told herself he was a man bound to his people, to a code she could not break into, to a life that had no room for the likes of her. And yet, when his eyes met hers in passing, they told a different story. His words said no, but his silence whispered yes. She lived in that space between the two, clinging to hope even as it slipped from her grasp like water through open hands. Days passed, and weeks, until the weight of his rejection began to wear her spirit thin. Each time she saw him at the river or standing guard near the canyon trail, she felt her chest tighten with longing. She began to wonder if staying would only tear her apart. She asked herself whether love, unspoken and unreturned, was worth the pain it carried. She thought of the world she had left behind, the roads that still stretched open, the life that might wait for her elsewhere. And in those quiet hours, when the fire burned low and the desert stars seemed to sharp against the black sky, she began to decide. The morning she chose to leave, the air was cool and the world strangely hushed, as though the earth itself had paused to listen. She folded her clothes neatly, though her hands shook, and tucked away the few belongings she had carried this far. Each item she touched carried a memory: her shawl, still carrying the faint scent of juniper from the nights by the fire, the little carving he had once given her without a word, and the small notebook where she had written the thoughts she could never say aloud. She packed them carefully, as though arranging the fragments of her heart into a small bundle she could bear upon her shoulders. Her footsteps sounded too loud as she walked across the clearing. The river glimmered nearby, its voice calm and steady, unaware of her turmoil. She glanced once more at the land that had shaped her days, at the trees standing tall like sentinels of memory, and at the faint trail where she had so often seen his figure appear. She wondered if he would notice her absence, or if her leaving would pass like the drifting of smoke on the wind. She wondered if, in time, he would remember her face when the seasons turned and the earth grew old. But deep inside, beneath the ache, there was something stronger stirring. It was not anger, though his words had wounded her. It was not despair, though loneliness clawed at her. It was resolve, the quiet, steady kind that grows when a heart has been tested and knows it must walk its own road. She did not know where her path would lead, only that it must carry her away from him, away from the silence that had held her captive. And yet, as she turned to leave, she felt the weight of his presence without even seeing him. Somewhere beyond the trees, perhaps standing still as stone, perhaps watching in silence, he was there. She did not know if he would come forward, if he would call her name, or if he would let her go without a word. Her heart pounded with the hope that he might stop her, that he might finally shatter the barrier between them. But the morning remained quiet, and her footsteps carried her further down the path. The desert held its breath. The warrior had spoken his truth, and she had made her choice. But the story between them was not yet finished. It lingered in the stillness of the river, in the fire that had not yet died, in the unspoken words that weighed heavier than stone. Somewhere, in that silence, the question remained, would he let her go? Or would he find the courage to claim the love he had denied? The answer waited beyond the bend in the trail, where her figure grew smaller, and his shadow lengthened against the rising sun. The path she chose was narrow, winding along the edge of the river where the earth was soft and marked by the prints of deer and wild horses. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, though the world was still and no one walked behind her. Her bag felt heavier than it should, as if the weight inside it was not just cloth and keepsakes, but all the pieces of her heart she had tried to gather. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky in muted gold, but she felt no warmth in its light. Behind her lay the place that had been both a home and a prison of silence. Ahead stretched a road she could not see clearly, only a promise that something different waited beyond. The Apache warrior remained in her mind, his face carved into memory like stone against the canyon walls. She thought of the way he stood tall among his people, always the first to carry burdens, always the last to speak of himself. His strength was admired, but his heart was locked behind doors no one could open. He had grown up in a world bound by tradition, where every step carried the weight of ancestors, where every choice was watched by the spirits of the land. Love for him was not a gift freely spoken, but a danger that could weaken his place among his people. She knew this, yet it did not ease the ache of his refusal. Her mind wandered back to the day she first saw him. She had been gathering water near the river, bending low to dip her pail into the current, when the sound of hooves startled her. She looked up and saw him on horseback, the animal moving with grace, his figure cut against the light of the setting sun. At first, she thought him distant, even unapproachable, but then he dismounted and led the horse to drink. Their eyes met briefly, and though no words were exchanged, something had passed between them. It was not love then, not yet. But it was a beginning, a thread that tied her spirit to his without her knowing it. She remembered how the others in the village spoke of him. Some said he was born with the spirit of a hawk, watching everything from above, never bound to the earth. Others whispered that he carried too many scars inside, wounds from battles fought long before she came. He was respected, yes, even feared by some, but rarely understood. And she, a stranger to his people, had felt both drawn closer and pushed away, caught in the pull of something she could not explain as she walked now. The sound of the river fading behind her, she tried to make sense of it all. Why had he given her that small carving of a bird months ago, if he truly meant his heart was closed? Why did his hand linger near hers when no one was looking? Why did his eyes soften only when they met her own? If he had no love for her, then what was that unspoken thing that lived in the spaces between them? These questions circled her thoughts like restless winds, giving her no peace. She told herself she must leave them behind, yet each step forward carried them with her still. The land itself seemed to reflect her turmoil. The desert was not just dry earth and stone. It was alive with contrasts. The river ran with strength, even in drought. The cliffs rose high, unyielding, but hid secret caves where cool shadows lingered. The wind could be harsh, cutting against the skin, yet at night it carried a song that soothed the weary. It was a land of opposites, and so too was her life with him. His words denied her, but his presence gave her hope. His strength kept her away, but his silence kept her near. She thought of the times when she had sat among his people, watching the dances by firelight. The children laughed, the elders told stories of the old wars, and the young men played their games of skill. He was always near, but never beside her. She remembered the way her heart leaped when he glanced her way across the fire, only for him to turn back quickly, his face hidden in shadow. It was in those moments she felt the sharp edge of his distance most of all. Yet she could not bring herself to leave then. Only now, after hearing his final words, had she found the strength to do so. Her steps slowed as the trail rose higher, leading her toward the ridge above the valley. From there she knew she could look back one last time. When she reached the top, she set down her bag and stood, breathing in the wide sweep of the land. The river glistened below. The village sat quietly in its hollow, smoke rising from morning fires. Beyond stretched the open desert, dotted with mesquite and tall grasses waving in the breeze. It was beautiful, painfully so, and she knew part of her would always remain tied to it. Her eyes searched the distance, half expecting to see his figure appear, riding fast to call her back. But the trail behind her was empty. And yet, unknown to her, he was not far. The Apache warrior stood in the trees, hidden from sight, his gaze fixed upon her retreating form. He had watched her from the moment she left the clearing, his chest tight, his mind at war with itself. His words still burned in his throat, "I can't love you." He had spoken them with all the force he could summon, believing it was for her own good. Love, in his world, was tangled with duty and sacrifice. To love her openly would mean drawing her into dangers she could not see, battles she was not meant to fight. His people came first, their survival always above his own heart. Yet as he watched her walking away, each step pulled at him like an arrow lodged deep in his flesh. He remembered the way she smiled by the river, how her laughter had startled even him, a man who had long forgotten such sounds. He remembered her kindness to the children, how they clung to her as though she had always belonged among them. He remembered the nights he lay awake, listening to the wind, fighting the urge to rise and go to her, to speak the words he could never allow himself to say. All of it weighed upon him now, heavier than any weapon he had carried into battle. And still he did nothing. He stood in silence, watching her vanish toward the horizon. Back on the ridge, she bent to lift her bag once more. Her hands trembled, not from the weight, but from the choice before her. To leave was to carve her life away from his, to seek a future without the shadow of his presence. To stay was to risk breaking apart piece by piece, waiting for words he might never speak. The path stretched ahead, uncertain and lonely, yet filled with the promise of freedom. She straightened her back, her resolve steady, though her heart cried out in protest. She told herself she would not turn back, not even once more. Still, as she walked on, the desert seemed alive with unseen eyes. The hawk circled high above, its wings cutting across the sky. The coyote's cry echoed faintly in the distance. The wind rose, carrying with it a sound she almost thought was his voice. She stopped, her breath caught, but when she listened closer, there was only silence. She shook her head, forcing herself forward, though doubt crept in with every step behind her. He remained rooted to the earth, torn between duty and desire, between the life he had vowed to protect and the woman he could not bear to lose. He knew if he let her go now, she might never return. He knew, too, that if he called her back, the consequences could unravel everything he had built. His people needed him strong, unbroken, untangled by ties that pulled his heart away. And yet, as he watched her disappear beyond the ridge, the silence inside him grew unbearable. The land held its breath once more. She walked forward into the unknown, her figure small against the vast horizon. He stood in the shadows, unseen, his heart raging against the chains he had forged himself. Neither spoke, neither moved to bridge the space between. The desert waited, silent and endless, holding their stories suspended in the air like a storm gathering on the edge of the sky, waiting for the moment it could no longer be contained, The ridge fell behind her, and the land opened wide. She followed a cattle track that faded across the flats, then slipped into a wash lined with cottonwoods. The air smelled of dust and sage. She kept a steady pace, though each sound made her look back. The word she carried, "no," still rang in her chest like a struck bell. She tried to let the rhythm of walking empty her thoughts, but memory kept filling them again. She had once lived in a town where the train came twice a week. There were church bells and clapboard houses, a small school, and a store with barrels of nails and sacks of flour. Folks there spoke of the West as a place where a person could start new. She had believed them. She had come because the thought of living the same quiet days felt like sleep. And she did not want to sleep through her own life. Out here the sky was wide and the ground honest. A person could see what was coming, or so it seemed at first. What she had not seen was a man who had changed the shape of her days. She had met others along the river as well. An older woman who wove baskets with willow, whose hands moved with a patient grace. A boy with quick eyes who asked her 100 questions about her old town. A trader with a long coat and a smile that never reached his eyes. The trader brought coffee and tins of sugar, small knives, needles, and tales of the settlements growing along the rail line. He said a company planned to send surveyors through the canyons soon. He said a new road would come and that fences would follow. The older woman had gone quiet at his words. The boy had asked whether the road would split the deer path. The trader had shrugged and grinned. The warrior had stood at the edge of the gathering and watched the man without a single blink. She remembered this now as she walked because change was not coming only to her heart. It was coming to the land. It was coming in ways that would test every vow the warrior had made. And she, a stranger who had grown to care for this place, could feel that test rising like heat off the stones. The thought steadied and troubled her at once. She wanted to help, yet she knew there were lines she must not cross. She was learning that care was not enough. Respect mattered more. She reached a stand of pinnon and rested in the shade. She drank from her canteen, then opened her bag. At the very bottom lay the small bird carving he had given her without a word. It fit in her palm like something alive. She traced the lines of its wings and felt a shiver run through her. She could not bear to throw it away. She could not bear to keep it either. In the end, she put it back in the bag, slid the strap over her shoulder, and pushed on. By noon she reached a dry gulch, where a narrow trail climbed toward the hills. The wind dropped there, and the sound of her boots on the stones seemed too loud. She paused to listen. A faint rattle came from the brush, then fell quiet. She moved slowly and made the climb. From the top she could see the rail line in the far distance, like a dark stitch across pale cloth. She knew there was a freight depot out that way, a scatter of buildings, and a water tank on long wooden legs. She had stayed there once, on the way west, and remembered the way the place smelled of coal and hot iron. It was not where she wanted to go. She needed to put miles between herself and the village. The depot was a place with beds and a table and a map nailed to the wall. She decided she would reach it by night and rest only until dawn far behind her. The warrior left the trees at last and followed her tracks. He moved fast at first, then slowed when he reached the ridge. He did not want her to hear him or to learn he had come. He only needed to know she was safe. That was what he told himself. His mind ran like a horse that had thrown its bit. He repeated the vows he had learned as a boy. Protect the people. Guard the water. Keep watch at the passes. Do not bring trouble through your own weakness. He had kept those vows. He would keep them still. Yet a voice beneath those words kept rising. It asked why a heart must be counted as weakness. It asked what kind of guard a man was if he could not speak truth to the one person who saw him as more than a shield. He stopped where the wash met the flats. He crouched and touched the dust. The marks of her boots were clear beside the tracks of a small wagon that had passed earlier. He smelled wood smoke on the wind and the faint bite of metal oil. He thought of the trader with the long coat and the close smile. The man had been to the depot last week and returned with a story about surveyors and stakes driven into the ground near the northern springs. The elders had met and sent a message to the river fort asking for a council. The answer had not yet come. He knew what a road would mean. It would bring fences across open land. It would bring people who did not learn the shape of the wind before they built a house. It would bring men who believed that maps were more real than the ground itself. He stood and kept walking. The boy with the quick eyes had watched him go that morning. The boy had a small bow slung across his back and a whistle he used to call birds into the brush. He liked to follow the warrior at a distance and then stick his head around a rock as if he had surprised him. Today, the warrior had sent him to carry wood to the older woman. The boy had scowled, then done as he was told, but now the task was finished, and the boy wanted answers. He went to the edge of the village, where a wagon stood with a broken wheel and a canvas cover patched with flour sacks. A man lay under the wagon with a wrench. The trader's boots stuck out beside him. "You ever fix anything that is not already broken?" the boy asked. The trader slid out from under the wagon with a grin. "I fix fortunes," he said. "Those are always broken." He nodded toward the pass. "Your friend left early, riding light. Makes a man wonder." The boy lifted his chin. "You wonder too much," he said. Then he thought of the woman heading out alone and felt a twist in his gut. He did not like the way the trader's eyes sharpened when someone was weak or scared. He walked away, but the worry followed him like a burr in his sock. The depot by the rail line was busy that evening. A mail sack had arrived late, and a freight wagon tipped under the weight of a crate marked with painted marks that meant nothing to the ranch hands. There were 2 soldiers on leave who played cards with a store clerk and lost their pay in a string of small mistakes. There was a woman with a baby who waited for a cousin who never came. There was a man with a wide hat who claimed to have found silver to the north. Voices rose and fell, and the clank of the pump by the water tank kept time. When she reached the edge of the yard, dust on her boots and weariness inside her bones, she paused to study the scene. She was not used to so many faces after weeks in the quiet of the valley. She chose a spot by the fence, near the trough where the night breeze cooled the air. A clerk brought her a cup of coffee and asked no questions. She sat with both hands wrapped around the cup and listened. Much of the talk was small. A calf gone missing, a horse that would not shoe, a rumor about taxes at the fort. But then 2 men near the door grew low and intent. One said he had been riding with surveyors up near the northern springs. He said they had found a place for the new road to cross the valley. He said a guide would meet them in a week and lead them past the old camp where the river makes a slow bend. She felt her heart jump. She knew that bend. She had washed clothes there with the older woman. Children had splashed in the shallows. The warrior had stood on the rocks and watched the far bank for signs of strangers. A thought rose that she did not want to face. What if the trader had offered to guide them? He knew the land. He liked money more than peace. He wore a smile like a mask. There were many who would take such work and tell themselves it was only a job. Maybe he was one of them. She set the cup down and looked toward the road again, thinking of the boy and the older woman and the quiet fires of the village. She felt as if her leaving had loosened a knot that should have stayed tight. She bought a bed for the night, but could not sleep. The depot walls seemed too close. The sound of the pump and the train wheel on the track made a steady rhythm that would not let her mind rest. Near midnight, she rose and stepped into the yard. The moon hung low, pale behind moving clouds. A figure stood by the water tank, tall and still. For a breath, she thought it might be him, and her chest went hollow. But when the figure shifted, she saw it was only the wide-hat man rolling a smoke. She turned back and stopped short. The trader was coming from the storehouse with a parcel under his arm. He did not see her in the shadow, but she could see his face clearly in the moonlight. There was no smile now. There was only calculation. He looked north toward the hills and then slipped into the darkness with the parcel close to his chest. At dawn, she left the depot and headed back the way she had come. She told herself she would not turn aside or let fear be her guide. She did not know what she could do, only that she would not be far away if trouble came. The road rose and fell. A dust devil spun across a field of dry weeds and vanished. 2 antelopes stood still as stones, then bounded away. When she reached the wash again, she found fresh tracks that lay over her own. The shape of the boot prints made her breath catch. She knew those prints. She stood a long time with her hand on her throat. He had followed her and then turned back. Or maybe he had stopped and waited. She looked up the trail and felt the old pull. She made herself start walking again. The warrior had slept little either. He had taken the high path along the ridge to watch the valley, and had seen dust rising near the northern spring spiders. Not many, but enough. He had gone to the elders at dusk and told them what he feared. They had listened without surprise. They had known this day would come. They asked him to stay in the village and prepare for a council if one was granted. He had agreed. Yet at first light he left again, drawn by an unease he could not name. It pulled him toward the wash and the cattle track across the flats. It pulled him toward the depot and the road beyond that. It pulled him toward her. The boy found him at the edge of the cottonwoods. He had a note clutched in his hand. He said the trader had left quietly before dawn and taken the narrow pass to the north. He said a ranch hand at the depot heard men speak of a guide and a river bend. He said the older woman had dreamed of stakes in the ground like iron bones. The warrior took the note and read it twice. Then he sent the boy to warn the families who camped near the northern springs and to watch for strangers on the old trail. The boy nodded and ran, his small bow bouncing against his spine. The path to the pass narrowed to a single set of steps through rock. The warrior moved like the wind where trees thin at the top of a hill. He saw broken twigs and a smudge of ash where a small fire had been covered in haste. He found a tiny scrap of canvas caught on a thorn. He found wheel ruts pressed into soft ground near a seep. The trail told a story, and the story quickened his pace. By noon he reached the place where the land opened to a wide shelf above the river. From there he could see the bend and the flat field beside it where the children played and the elders laid nets for fish in the spring. At the far end of the field stood 3 thin stakes, shining pale in the sun. He felt a cold settle in his chest. He stood very still and listened. A hawk cried overhead. Water spoke against stone. Far off, a single hammer strike rang against metal. He turned and saw a rider coming along the shelf from the south. A woman on foot kept pace beside the horse as best she could. Even from a distance, he knew her walk. Something unraveled inside him and reached for her. He did not move toward her. He did not call her name. He could not. Instead, he stepped back into the shadow of a boulder and fixed his gaze on the field and the stakes that had no right to stand there. She reached the shelf, her breath tight and her throat dry. She saw the gleam of the stakes. She saw the ribbons tied to them that whipped in the wind. She felt a kind of sorrow that had no words. She took one step toward the field, then another. She stopped when a small figure rose from the grass near the water. The boy, he had his bow in his hand and his hair tied back. He lifted the bow and pointed it not at her, but toward the crest of the field where the cottonwoods stand in a line. She looked and saw a man in a long coat standing with 2 others. The man raised an arm, and the others moved to lift a crate from a wagon. She did not need the moonlight to know the man's face. The trader had brought his smile to the river bend. The warrior watched. The same scene and felt the old vows rise like a shield. Protect the people. Guard the water. Keep watch at the passes. He knew he could drive the men off the field for a day, maybe a week. He knew, too, that the road would not die because one man said no. He needed the council. He needed time. He needed a way to hold the ground without spilling sorrow across it. He set his hand on the stone and closed his eyes. He could not allow his heart to choose his next move. A voice behind him spoke low. It was hers. She had found him in the shadow of the rock. She said she had no right to tell him what to do, but she could not stand aside while stakes cut into the earth like blades. She said the trader was not working alone. He had made promises to men who would not hear reason unless someone they trusted spoke first. She said she would go down to the field and speak to the men. She said she would draw them to the far side of the bend with talk of maps and routes, and while they looked away, he and the boy could pull the stakes and scatter the crate. He turned toward her, and the words he had, denied for weeks, pressed at his mouth. He did not say them. He asked instead if she understood what risk she was taking. She said yes. Her voice was steady, though her hand shook. The boy motioned from below. The men at the wagon had not seen them yet. The wind lifted the ribbons tied to the stakes. The water went on speaking in its slow language. The warrior looked from the field to the woman and then to the open sky and knew that none of his choices would be clean. They moved as one, keeping to the rock's shadow until the slope began. He saw the trader lift a hand in greeting to someone coming along the lower trail. A second wagon appeared, this one with a taller man on the seat and a rifle in a scabbard. The warrior felt the ground narrow under his feet, as if the land itself was drawing a line. The woman straightened her shawl and stepped out from the shadow to begin her walk toward the men who did not yet see her coming. He reached for the boy and told him to wait for his sign. The boy nodded, eyes bright as flint. The wind fell quiet. The first words she would speak at the river bend rose to her lips. The warrior's hand hovered near the hilt at his side, not to strike, but to steady his will. Across the water a kingfisher flashed blue against the reeds and then was gone. The trader turned his head as if hearing a sound from far away. The tall man on the second wagon shifted the rifle and narrowed his eyes. The stakes stood in the sun, thin and stubborn. The river carried a secret under its calm skin, and the next breath held everything that might happen and everything that might be lost. The wind carried dust across the river. Bend as she stepped out from the rocks and walked toward the wagon. Her boots sank slightly in the soft ground, but her steps did not slow. She held her chin high, though inside her chest her heart beat like a drum. The trader was the first to notice her. His head tilted, his mouth curled into a thin smile that never reached his eyes. He whispered to the taller man beside him. The taller man shifted his stance and rested his hand on the rifle stock as though waiting for a reason to lift it. The other workers by the crates paused too, their hands uncertain, caught between duty and unease. She knew every eye was on her, and she forced her breath to stay even. The warrior stood higher up in the shadow of the stone, watching each movement with a gaze sharp as flint. He had told himself he would not let his heart lead. But as he saw her walk alone into the open, the weight of his vows pressed harder than ever. He could feel the boy beside him, tense, ready to move at the smallest sign. The boy's hand gripped his bow so tightly his knuckles were white. Below them, the stakes shimmered like bone in the sun. The longer they stood there, the more the land seemed to whisper that once hammered in deep. Those stakes would root and spread. Nothing could undo what had been planted. She stopped a few paces short of the wagon. Dust coated her skirt, and the sun pressed against her back. "You should not be here," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. The taller man with the rifle gave a dry laugh. "Road's coming through," he said. "We have papers, we have orders, and soon enough, we'll have a company of men to lay down rails." The trader raised his brow at her, his smile widening as if her presence confirmed something he had expected. "And you," he said softly, "what brings you here? I thought you had left." She met his eyes without flinching. "I came back because I know what this land means. You set your stakes here. You cut into the heart of a people who will not give it up. You talk of maps and orders, but you forget the lives tied to this river." Her words carried across the field, and even the workers shifted uneasily. The boy crouched low in the grass below, watching. The warrior did not move, but inside his pulse was a storm. He knew her plan to hold their gaze, to keep their ears busy while he and the boy pulled the stakes, but every word she spoke drew her deeper into danger. He had to trust her courage, though each second gnawed at his control. The trader spread his hands, as if he were only a man making an honest living. "It is not me who decides," he said. "The company pays me to guide. If I say no, they find another. The road will come either way. Better to help shape it than to fight what cannot be stopped." His words were smooth, too smooth, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted toward the field where the stakes gleamed, and then back to her, as if he feared losing ground. She caught the flicker and pressed on. "You claim it cannot be stopped, but that is a lie you tell yourself. You want silver, you want coin, and you dress it and talk of fate. But a road built on greed will never hold." Her voice rose at the last, sharp as a blade, and the taller man's hand tightened on his rifle. At that same moment, the boy moved. He slid through the grass like a shadow, reached the first stake, and gripped it with both hands. It was driven deep, but he pulled with all his strength. The wood groaned, and with a sudden jolt, it loosened. The sound carried faintly, a crack like a twig snapping. The taller man's head snapped toward it, suspicion flaring in his eyes. The trader narrowed his gaze too, his smile faltering. She saw it and knew she had only a breath to act. She stepped closer to them, her voice cutting sharp. "Look at me. If you think this land will bow, then tell me so to my face. Do not turn your head and pretend you are deaf to the truth." Her words drew them back, for pride is a hook sharper than steel. The taller man glared at her, insult burning in his expression. The trader tilted his head as though weighing whether her defiance was worth silencing. The warrior saw the shift, saw the boy still pulling at the stake, and knew the moment balanced on a knife. He slid from the shadow, moving down the slope with a hunter's quiet grace. Each step was measured, every sense alert. He reached the edge of the field just as the boy tugged the second stake loose. The boy's face lit with triumph. But the sound was louder this time, and one of the workers looked up. "Someone's there," the man muttered. The taller man swung his rifle half around, scanning the field. The trader's smile vanished altogether, replaced with a thin, hard line. She felt their attention tilt, and fear rose like cold water in her veins. She forced her voice louder, sharper, pulling them back. "Do you not see? Every stake you drive is a wound in the earth. Every crate you unload is a shadow on your own soul. There will come a day when no map, no coin, no soldier will protect you from what you have sown." Her words rang with a force she had not planned, almost as if the land itself spoke through her. The workers exchanged glances, uncertain. Even the taller man hesitated, though his grip on the rifle remained firm. For a moment it seemed she might hold them, but the trader was quicker. He narrowed his eyes, stepped closer, and hissed. "You speak too boldly for someone with no claim here." His hand shot up, signaling the workers. "Find who's in that field." The warrior's muscles tightened. He had seconds before the workers spread across the bend and saw the boy. He raised his hand, signaling the boy to stop pulling and stay low. The boy obeyed, crouching in the grass, eyes wide. The warrior's gaze flicked back to her, standing in front of the trader and the rifleman, and he knew the storm was breaking. He stepped into the open, silent but unmistakable, his presence carrying a weight that stilled the nearest worker's mid-step. The trader's face changed when he saw him, a flicker of wariness breaking through his mask. The taller man lifted the rifle higher, barrel glinting in the sun. The boy's heart pounded as he watched the warrior walk forward, every line of his body steady as stone. She felt her breath lock in her chest. The distance between them and the men with the stakes was small now, and each second seemed to stretch long. The trader lifted his chin, forcing a thin smile back into place. "So," he said, voice calm, though his eyes betrayed unease, "you came after all. I wondered how long before duty outweighed pride." The warrior did not answer. His silence spoke louder than words, and the air thickened with tension. The boy shifted, ready to spring if needed. She stood frozen between them, torn by fear and determination. The workers watched, unsure, their hands hovering near crates, near tools that could become weapons. The taller man with the rifle set his feet wider apart, ready to raise it. The warrior's hand hovered near his hilt, not to strike first, but to remind all who watched that he was no man to turn aside. The trader studied him with eyes sharp as glass. "We are only marking ground," he said, smooth once more. "No harm done, unless you make it so." The warrior's voice came at last, low and steady. "The harm began the moment you struck the earth." The words settled like a stone dropped in still water. The men shifted uneasily again, waiting. The boy's breath came fast, and she stood with her fists clenched, knowing that in the next heartbeat everything could shatter. The river bent behind them, its surface calm, but beneath, the current pulled hard. The sky above burned with the weight of the sun. The stakes lay torn from the earth and the grass, glaring proof that the land had already resisted, and every person there, bound by pride, fear, and unspoken ties, braced for the moment when silence would break and the first move decide all that followed. The river bend held its breath. No one moved. No one dared to speak. The warrior's words hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to break, and every man there felt the weight of it. The taller man's fingers twitched against his rifle, his jaw tight, but he had not yet raised it. The trader's lips pressed into a thin line, his smile long gone. She stood between them all, her eyes locked on the warrior, as if silently telling him to hold his ground, but not break the fragile stillness. The boy crouched low in the grass, his chest rising and falling quickly, knowing one wrong step would expose him. It was a moment stretched to its very edge, balance between peace and ruin. Then, from the group of workers, an older man cleared his throat. His hair was gray at the temples, his clothes worn from years of labor. He stepped forward slowly, his hands open, showing no weapon. "We came to earn bread," he said, voice rough but steady. "We do not wish to fight. If the land is not ours to take, then perhaps we should hear the ones who live here." His words broke through the silence like a chisel against stone. The rifleman shot him a sharp look, but the others shifted uneasily. The trader narrowed his eyes, but even he could see the mood changing. Greed could drive him. Orders could guide him. Yet men who felt the weight of conscience would not easily follow into bloodshed. The warrior took a slow step forward, his hand no longer near his hilt, but open at his side. "This river is life to my people," he said, voice calm yet powerful. "The stakes you drive are not harmless marks. They are wounds that cannot heal. But if you turn back now, if you carry no harm further, then there need be no fight." His words rolled like water over stone, simple and unshaken. The boy's heart lifted as he listened, for he heard in those words the balance between strength and mercy. She felt her breath ease, though she did not let her guard down. She knew the trader still calculated, still weighed whether coin meant more than peace. The trader drew a long breath, his eyes flicking from the warrior to her, then to the stakes scattered in the grass. He was a man who had walked many borders, who had spoken smooth lies in many towns. But here he stood, outnumbered not by weapons, but by will. For a moment he looked as though he might press forward, that he might order the rifle raised. But then he saw the workers behind him, saw their shifting feet, their uncertainty, and he knew if he pushed, they would not all follow. His smile returned, faint and false, but it no longer held power. "Very well," he said. "If this ground breeds only trouble, then let it lie." He turned to the taller man. "We leave." The rifleman hesitated, his pride still raw, but the trader's tone was final. With a curse under his breath, he lowered the weapon. The workers slowly moved back to the wagon, lifting crates and ropes with hands that shook less from fear now than from relief. The older man nodded once toward the warrior, not as surrender, but as respect. The boy released the breath he had held so long, and she finally unclenched her fists. The trader lingered a moment, his eyes cold, before turning and climbing onto the wagon seat. "The road will come," he said quietly, though more to himself than to them. "Maybe not today, but it will come." The words carried away on the wind, thin and uncertain. The wagon rolled out of the bend, the sound of wheels fading against the stones. When the last of the dust settled, the field stood quiet again. The stakes lay broken in the grass, and the river ran clear as if nothing had happened. The boy stood and looked at the warrior, pride in his eyes, though his hands still trembled. "We stopped them," he said softly. The warrior gave a single nod. "For now," he answered, "and now is enough." She stepped closer, her eyes on him, searching for what lay behind his steady face. He met her gaze, and in the silence between them lay all the words he had refused to speak before. Love, duty, sorrow, hope, they all mingled there. Unspoken yet understood, they walked together back toward the village. The boy running ahead with sudden energy, his fear forgotten in the joy of victory. The older woman stood waiting at the edge of the path, her shawl drawn tight, her eyes shining. She listened as they told what had passed, nodding slowly as if she had known all along how it must unfold. "The land is not won in a day," she said. "It is guarded each dawn, each dusk, by those who do not yield." Her words sank deep into them, a reminder that this was only one battle in a long watch. Days passed, and though the threat of the road lingered like a shadow, no more wagons came. The trader's name was whispered in towns downriver, where he tried to sell his maps and his promises, but no men would sign on. Too many had heard how he was turned back at the bend. The boy grew braver, walking the river path each morning, watching for signs of change. The older woman taught him songs of the land, songs he sang with pride as he carried water and gathered wood. The people of the village worked together, their bonds stronger than before, knowing they had stood on the edge of loss and held firm. For her, the days were filled with both peace and restlessness. She had left once, believing distance would quiet her heart, but the pull of this place had brought her back. She helped grind corn, mend cloth, carry firewood. Yet always her eyes strayed to the horizon, wondering when the world beyond would try again to break through. And always, when she met the warrior's gaze across the firelight, she felt the weight of what lay between them. He had told her once that he could not love her, for duty bound him like chains. Yet now, after standing together against the threat, she felt those chains bend, if not break. Still he spoke no words, only offered his steady presence, silent loyalty. One evening, as the sun set red behind the cliffs, she found him at the river's edge. He stood still, watching the water flow, his face marked by shadows of thought. She stepped beside him without speaking, listening to the current. At last he turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. "I cannot change who I am," he said. "My first vow is to my people, to this land. But know this: you have walked into my life as surely as this river carves the stone. I cannot send you away again." His words were not a declaration of love, as in stories told by firelight. Yet to her, they carried more truth. She placed her hand over his, and he did not pull away. The boy's laughter carried to them from further up the path, and the older woman's song rose with the evening wind. The warrior and she stood side by side, not promising what tomorrow would bring, but holding fast to what they had won together today. The stakes lay broken far behind them, left to rot in the grass, a sign that not all forces of greed and change could cut through what was guarded with heart and courage. Seasons shifted. The rains came, swelling the river, and the fields grew green again. The road builders never returned, their maps fading into dust and rumor. The trader's face was not seen again in these parts. In the village, life went on with the rhythm of harvest and hunt, laughter and sorrow, hope and memory. The boy grew into strength, carrying both bow and song with pride. The older woman's hair turned whiter, yet her voice never lost its fire. She would often remind them all that every dawn brought new choices, and every dusk asked if they had honored the land well, and she, once a stranger, was no longer called outsider. Her hands worked beside theirs, her heart beat with theirs, and when the warrior stood beside her, no one questioned it. They had faced darkness and chosen to protect rather than yield. In the end, that choice shaped not only their bond, but the path of all who shared the river bend. The land still held silence, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the quiet strength of a people who had faced loss and found their voice. The river ran steady, carrying away the dust of old stakes and broken plans, carrying forward the promise that as long as there were those who stood firm, no road could erase what was sacred. She knew the world beyond might rise again with new threats, new greed, but she also knew they would face it together. And in that knowledge, in the simple truth of standing side by side with the warrior and the people, she found peace. The story of the river bend lived on, told in whispers and in song, not as a tale of conquest, but as a lesson that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. That love can be silent yet unbreakable, and that land, like the heart, endures not through force, but through those who guard it with care. As the sun set once more in fire across the horizon, she looked at the warrior, and for the first time, she smiled without doubt. The road had not come, and perhaps it never would. But even if it did, they were ready. The bend was theirs, the river was theirs, and the life they had claimed was stronger than any map or stake. Top of form, bottom of form.